Welcome to our Bible study today on Wednesday, November 4th. I'm very glad that you are a part of this today. I thought that I would begin by reading the assigned psalm for today out of the Christian Daily Prayer, the daily office that I have talked about before. It's Psalm 86, and I think a good way to begin this new day that the Lord has provided for us. I probably understand that many people are quite anxious this morning or afternoon or evening, as we're aware that there is a presidential election that's still on. So however you come out on this, I'm sure it's a very tense time. But I do ask for a little perspective and trust and gratitude today that the Lord is our shepherd, and we shall not be in want. And Mary's beautiful prayer, "Do not be afraid." This is from Psalm 86. Turn your ear, O Lord, and give answer, for I am poor and needy. Preserve my life, for I am faithful. Save the servant who trusts in you. You are my God, have mercy on me, Lord, for I cry to you all the day long. Give joy to your servant, O Lord, for to you I lift up my soul. O Lord, you are good and forgiving, full of love to all who call. Give heed, O Lord, to my prayer, and attend to the sound of my voice. In the day of distress I will call, and surely you will reply. Among the gods there is none like you, O Lord, nor work to compare with yours. All the nations shall come to adore you, and glorify your name, O Lord, for you are great and do marvelous deeds, you who alone are God. Show me your way, Lord, so that I may walk in your truth. Guide my heart to fear your name. I will praise you, Lord my God, with all my heart and glorify your name forever. For your love to me has been great. You have saved me from the depths of the grave. The proud have risen against me. Ruthless men seek my life. To you they pay no heed. But you, God of mercy and compassion, slow to anger, O Lord, abounding in love and truth, turn and take pity on me. O give your strength to your servant and save your handmaid's son. Show me a sign of your favor, that my foes may see to their shame that you console me and give me your help. Amen. Our lessons for this upcoming Sunday, which is the 23rd Sunday after Pentecost, is Amos chapter 5, a pretty well-known passage, 18 through 24, Psalm 70, 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verses 13 through 18, and then Matthew's Gospel 25, 1 through 13. Now, on your handout, you're going to know that it goes from Matthew 25, 1 through 13, and then there's another section, 14 through 30, and then 31 through 46. I will discuss why I added those two additional sections of Matthew's Gospel from Matthew 25 in just a moment. My intention today is to discuss Matthew's Gospel, and then in the time that I have remaining, I will be discussing the passage from Amos. All right, so I'm going to read Matthew 25, verses 1 through 13. Then the kingdom of heaven will be like this. 10 bridesmaids took their lamps and went to meet the bridegroom. 5 of them were foolish, and 5 were wise. When the foolish took their lamps, they took no oil with them, but the wise took flasks of oil with their lamps. As the bridegroom was delayed, all of them became drowsy and slept. But at midnight there was a shout, "Look, here is the bridegroom. Come out to meet him." Then all those bridesmaids got up and trimmed their lamps. The foolish said to the wise, "Give us some of your oil, for our lamps are going out." But the wise replied, "No, there will not be enough for you and for us. You had better go to the dealers and buy some for yourselves." And while they went to buy it, the bridegroom came, and those who were ready went with him into the wedding banquet, and the door was shut. Later the other bridesmaids came also, saying, "Lord, Lord, open to us." But he replied, "Truly I tell you, I do not know you. Keep awake, therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour." So on your handout, you're going to see the larger context of Matthew 25, verses 1 through 13. And November 8th, which is this upcoming Sunday, is Matthew 25, verses 1 through 13. Next Sunday is 14 through 30, which is provided on your handout as well, which is the parable of the three servants. And then on November 22nd, we have that third part before you, the Great Judgment, which is Christ the King Sunday. We are arriving at the end of our church year A, with the first Sunday in Advent, which is the last Sunday in November, being the new church season, which is year B. So we are coming to the end of a church year season. I'm going to read the parts that's before you as well for the larger context, and then we'll get into discussing Matthew 25, verses 1 through 13 only. Matthew 24, verses 1 through 36 is a very close parallel to the little apocalypse that is found in Mark 13, 1 through 32. But then Matthew greatly expands the conclusion to the speech. So, like most times, Mark expands upon Mark's gospel. An apocalypse, generally a term of negative, a negative term when used. It is literally the lifting up of the veil. It comes as a result of the end times. And as Revelation is often interpreted, this time of gloom and doom, we have studied before that it is a book of hope. So it is the lifting up of the veil of no longer any separation between ourselves and God, and then also the separation that we exist with one another. Our lectionary ends with the church year with the text about the coming of the Son of Man, which leads into the new year of the season of Advent, the season of coming, both coming as the conquering Son of Man at the end of time, and then the coming as the helpless infant in a manger. Matthew's final discourse from Jesus deals with two major questions then. So as we're arriving at the end here, when will Christ return is a question. And of course, no one knows, but there will be signs, signs which I believe have always been with us. And the second question is, what shall we do while we wait? Matthew's expanded conclusion deals primarily with the second question. So it's interesting. A lot of the question of those two questions, I would say the first one takes prominence. When will Christ return? Right? That's sort of that questions. When, and we're looking at certain days and times and trying to match up things that are happening in the world. But we may not, and I'm generalizing here, we may not ask the question as much, what shall we do while we wait? Which is probably a more important question, because we have more control of what we do while we wait, as we have no control over when he will come. So why not kind of spend our energy and time focused on things that we can do, or at least we can be a part of. Now, let's talk a little bit about apocalyptic literature. A lot of what I'm going to be sharing today is a mixture of different sources, but primarily from someone I've used before, Brian Stoffergen. And he writes, I'm not sure that apocalyptic literature and its eschatological emphasis speaks directly to us today in the same way that it did in the past. Apocalyptic literature grew up to offer hope to persecuted people, as its basic message is, you are suffering in this evil world because you are faithful, so be patient. Remain faithful, and you will be rewarded at the end. Now, this is a quite different contrast to prophetic literature, whose basic message is this: you are suffering because you are sinful. Repent and change your ways, and your sufferings will end. For the most part, 21st century American Christians are not suffering, and when multitudes do suffer, as thousands are because of perhaps the devastation of hurricanes, we seldom blame it on our sinfulness or our faithfulness. So the question before us is, what shall we do while we wait for Jesus' return today? That's our question. Does that speak to Christians today? who have been, as we know, waiting much longer than Matthew's original hearers. I found that distinction to be very helpful. I never really thought of it that way, but two different forms of literature: apocalyptic literature, which is found in Matthew's Gospel, of course, Revelation as well, parts of Thessalonians. We may be a little bit more comfortable or familiar with prophetic literature, right? And the reason you're suffering is because you're sinful. So change your ways, and then that suffering will end. I kind of like that. Now, I'll admit, this Matthew passage is a little confusing on the surface. It's not one of my favorite Gospels. I guess, we could admit the Gospel parts that we like better. Not my favorite text to be dealing with, but one of the powerful things about a lectionary is that it forces you to deal with texts that you may want to avoid. So let's talk a little bit about this whole thing about having enough oil. What could this mean? So literally, our text answers the questions that is before us. What shall we do while we wait with? Make sure you have enough oil for your lamps. So if we're trying to answer that first question, and I think there's a lot more to the answer than this, but the question before us, the first question is, when will Jesus return? We can't answer that. The second question is, so what shall we do while we wait? And the answer that comes out of these 13 verses are, make sure that you have enough oil for your lamps. So, but what does that mean? So one of the difficulties that we have today is trying to figure out what oil symbolizes. Martin Luther thought that it represented faith. But then the ponderant says, but can you run out of faith? That's not something that I'm normally comfortable with or thinking about. It's a question before us today. Many modern commentators may think that it represents good works, and there is some support for that interpretation. A verb related to the Greek word for lamps. So, of course, as we look at the English translation lamps, there's a Greek word that's behind it. That same Greek word is used in Matthew 5, verses 15 through 16 in reference to good works. So mark that down, and you can go back and look at it. Matthew 5, 15 through 16. Here's the passage. No one, after lighting a lamp, there's the word lamp, puts it under the bushel basket, but on the lampstand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. Now, as we're also looking at the word foolish, the verbal form of foolish is used also in the preceding verse, Matthew 5, verse 13. So mark that down as well. So we're trying to make some connections with some of the words, significant words in our passage for Sunday, with how those words are used in previous passages of Matthew's Gospel. So when we're trying to focus in on a deeper meaning of foolish, we look back to Matthew 5, verse 13, which says, you are the salt of the earth, but if the salt has lost its taste, literally become foolish, how can its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything, but it is thrown out and trampled underfoot. So the same words for both wise and foolish are used in Matthew 7, 24 through 27, where the difference between the two house builders is whether or not they acted on Jesus' words. So hang with me here. I know I'm throwing a lot at you, but I'm just hoping to kind of create a foundation, and then we can kind of come out somewhere at the end with as much information as possible. So we're now looking at wise and foolish. This is Matthew 24:27. It says, everyone then who hears these words of mine and acts on them will be like a wise man who built his house on a rock. The rain fell, the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on the house, but it did not fall, because it had been founded on the rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not act on them will be like a foolish man who has built his house on sand. The rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell, and great was the fall. So the same word for wise is used in Matthew 24, verse 45, which implies doing the right thing at the proper time. And here's the verse. Who then is faithful and a wise slave, whom his master has put in charge of his household, to give to the other slaves their allowance of food at the proper time? So if oil then represents good deeds, right? So we talked about, is oil representing faith? And then our question is, well, can faith run out? Or does oil represent good works? And then the question is, well, if oil represents good deeds or good works, it leaves us with some puzzling questions about the parable. Can good deeds then run out? Can one run to the store and buy more good deeds? See, you can see why this is not one of my favorite passages, but I'm still attempting to tackle it today. I should have just gone right to Amos and Thessalonians. But anyway, I'm already knee-deep in it, so let's keep going. Now, there's a writer by Professor Carter. This comes out of the book of Matthew in the Margins, and Professor Carter writes, "What preparation, then, is necessary? What does the lamp oil represent, if anything? While some have attempted specific answers, either good deeds or faith or the Holy Spirit, in the absence of any particular indication, which I would agree with, it seems that a generic reference to faithful and obedient discipleship as defined by the whole gospel is more convincing." And I think Professor Carter says that the context supports this. The maidens are to be like the slave who actively, faithfully, and obediently carries out what he has been instructed to do. This echoes again back in Matthew chapter 7, verse 24 through 27. The wise and the foolish points to the conclusion also. So while there may be some argument that oil is not good deeds, I think that it does represent the power that produces the good deeds. Example, the power needed to produce light. Or in other words, the oil is the word or the spirit which leads people to either act or not act as well. This is not one of those Bible studies where there's a lot of immediate resolution to it, which I do regret. But, that's just the way it works sometimes. I think it's worth our time and our study nonetheless, and it gets us thinking. It's also a moment in which that you can run with this passage. Finding this Bible study is not satisfying, which I understand. You can then spend some more time on yourself and dig around and share the results as well. I'm going to jump down now to who needs to know whom, because that's kind of one of the troubling parts of me as a big tent gospel person, right? My prayer is that, and I've shared this in other Bible studies, that in the end times everybody's gathered in through this drawing into the cross of Jesus. And whether you have acknowledged Jesus in your life, at the end times there's this awareness of a love, and Jesus on this cross is just drawing all people and things to himself. That's my prayer. That's my wish. That's my desire. That's the gospel to me. But parts of Matthew's gospel, to fully acknowledge, doesn't contradict that, but it does kind of make you think a little bit more about it as well, right? And this Matthew's passage as well, it's sort of this, you did not know me, and I do not now know you, just sort of pushing away rather than gathering in. So let's acknowledge that. Let's name that. So let's talk a little bit about needing to know whom. When the foolish virgins find the shut door, they cry out, "Lord, Lord, open to us." The response is, "Truly I am telling you, I do not know you." And there is a similar scene that is also presented by Jesus in Matthew chapter 7, verses 21 through 23. So go back and look at that one as well. I'll read it to you. It says, "Not everyone who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father in heaven. On that day many will say to me, 'Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and cast out demons in your name, and do many deeds of power in your name?' Therefore I will declare to them, 'I never knew you. Go away from me, you evildoers.'" So doing the will of the Father seems to be, in particular in Matthew's gospel, more than simply prophesying or exercising or miracle making, but it also requires being known by the Lord, the bridegroom. In Matthew chapter 7, again, what I just read, the word know is a very important biblical word. I've shared this in other Bible studies before, but it bears repeating, especially in this context. The Greek word for know behind it is much deeper than just kind of knowing in your head, but to come to knowledge about something or someone. But euphemistically, it's also knowing sexually. This word can simply mean to have information about, right? That head knowledge. But it can also mean to be intimately acquainted with or stand in close relationship to. So this is a deep sense of knowing, not just kind of like knowing your name or knowing of you or hearing about you, but knowing. And I think all of us understand, especially married couples, there is a level of knowing one another in a very deep way. And that's what this text is really getting to. So perhaps rather than asking the perhaps over-asked question, do you know the Lord? Right? That's a question that comes out in certain circles of Christianity. Do you know the Lord? Maybe you've been asked that. Maybe a better question to ask is, does the Lord know you? Or how well does the Lord know you? So if you want to kind of get in a little tit for tat, if that happens to you, if that question comes, do you know the Lord? And then your response is, well, does the Lord know you? And then there might be kind of, I never thought about that. From that question, we can explore ways that we allow other people to know us. What does it take for us to enter into a close relationship then with another person? How might that relate to how we pray and relate to God? For example, giving our names, our occupations and histories, likes and dislikes, sharing our deepest secrets, confessing and exposing to one another our deepest sins. Yeah, that's kind of cool. So, kind of a digger deep there in some word play. Now, there was something that Brian Stoffergen had shared. I'm going to read this directly from him. And he writes about being connected through, or connected though distant. This is interesting. As an analogy of this whole eschatological section then, I've talked about grandparents coming for Thanksgiving or Christmas. They are coming. So we have to get the house and the guest room ready for them. At the same time, there are ways that grandchildren can keep in touch, keep the relationship current with their distant grandparents while they are waiting for their visit. They can make phone calls, they can send letters, pictures, videos, etc. Often in communicating with the distant relatives, the children talk about what they have done. Even though those deeds aren't the basis of the relationship, they are part of letting the grandparents know who the grandkids are. If we understand oil as having a close relationship with God, the power behind our lives, the power that gives us a glow, shining witness in the world, it is possible to let that relationship run out. When the bridegroom comes, it is too late to try and establish the relationship. Although we tend to downplay our American individualism, at least within the Christian church, that's a point about community. Brian Stoffergen says, I think that this parable could be used to stress the necessity of having one's own personal relationship with Jesus, to be known by Jesus. It can't be meditated through other people who have it. Example, one's parents or grandparents or the pastor. So if we were to take this approach, I would stress the for you-ness of the sacrament, where God establishes a personal relationship with each person who communes. Isn't that wonderful? Very powerful. Remember, during the Eucharistic prayer, given for you, shed for you. So I'm first, I don't want to say guilty, but I very much downplay individualness. I'm always raising up about community, about the communal salvation, right? Gathering in community, our communal gifts that we have. That's where I kind of lean towards. But this study today had reminded me of the importance of that individual connection and fostering. Because then I think when that individual connection and fostering happens, that then helps the community out even more because of that deep, personal, intimate, knowing relationship that you and I have with Jesus. Very powerful. I'm glad that I was able to read that and study that because it's been helpful to me. All right, last section. I think I'm only going to do Matthew today, and I apologize for not doing Amos, but I'll do it at another time. Last section is going to be about staying awake. Maybe for some of you who were up late last night watching the election, you're having a hard time staying awake today. I actually slept pretty well. I went to bed, and anyway. One of the key images of life while we are waiting is staying awake. Both the wise and the foolish virgins fall asleep. It's in verse 5. One does not even have to keep watch or stay alert, because there is a loud cry that indicates that the time has come. That's in verse 6. So this is kind of neat. There is an eschatological alarm clock. Thus, these words need to be interpreted symbolically. There is a writing by a gentleman named, I don't know his first name, his last name is Boring, and he's writing out of the New Interpreter's Bible in Matthew, and he writes, Matthew opposes the frantic quest for eschatological information, and he pictures faithful disciples as those who do their duty at appropriate times and are thus prepared for the parousia whenever it comes. Such disciples can lay down to sleep in confidence rather than being kept awake by panicky last-minute anxiety. Thus, the Matthew's meaning for this being prepared is being prepared, not being kept awake or watching. So rather than just this simple like staying awake, right? Like just kind of keeping your eyes open all the time, never going to sleep, like looking around, you're a big hot mess because you have no sleep. Really, what Matthew is driving at here is being prepared. So when you go to sleep, it's like getting ready for a trip. You want to be on the road at 7 a.m. Well, if you have everything packed the night before, you can just get up, get on the road, and go. But if you haven't packed, then you're running around like a crazy person. So that's helpful to me. So just be prepared in your daily life. Just do what you need to do faithfully. Dot your I's, cross your T's. When you don't, start back another day. Quiet your mind a little bit. Stop worrying about every level of detail. Just do what you need to do. Do what you need to do each day. And if we all do what we need to do each day, that then builds up the community. All right, speech ended. So here's the final thing. We are to be prepared then for the coming. I think that we do this by participating in and celebrating the many comings of the Son of Man. Jesus' presence in the Word, Jesus' presence in the sacrament, Jesus' presence in gathering together, Jesus' presence in our going out to make disciples, Jesus' presence as we minister to the least of these. And so such repeated connection to these 5 and more areas of a life and ministry, Jesus then keeps our lights empowered for witness and service and lets Jesus know who we are. All right. This went way better, at least in my mind, than I thought it was going to go. I'll let you make the judgment on your end. But I feel good that I'm going to leave it there. There's a lot to kind of stew over. As always, appreciate your comments, questions, concerns, and thank you again for your participation. Bye-bye.